Okay, this video tutorial will cover how to import your game character into the game engine Unity. This way you can walk him around, and when you release he'll go into idle position. When you walk forward, he'll walk forward. You can turn him whichever direction you want him to go, and you can walk around your map. Okay, so to begin with, let's pause this one and close this out. If you already have Unity, if you're using the school's computer, then you're fine with that, but if you want to install it at home, you can grab that from unity3d.com, and you go to Get Unity Now. There's multiple versions, but the free version is all you would need, so you can just click on Download Now, and this is the 5.4 version. I think I'm using 5.3 for the demo, but it's pretty similar. Alright, so let's jump back over to, or let's pull up Unity. So I'll click on the new Unity file since I already have it installed. This will boot up the opening screen. You can pick on whatever you're looking for. So I'm going to click on New, and I'm going to call this, I guess I'll call this Demo. Demo project. I'll put this on the desktop and 3D, and that's all you really need to do. Let's call it Demo Basic Character Project. Cool. Create project, and that should load up a brand new scene. So you have to create the scene before you can, or create the project before you can open Unity. Alright, so here's the Unity interface. Over here you can have multiple different combinations of windows. When you open it, you might not see an animator panel. You can grab the panel and put panels inside things, so you'd have like the entire scene or the game, and you can move these around at different sizes. So what you'll see here is what the game view sees, and over here is what you'll see that you can control and move around in 3D space. Very similar to Maya. If you hold the Alt key and the left mouse button, you can rotate the screen. If you want to zoom in, you can use the scroll wheel. And if you want to pan the screen, you hold the Alt and the middle mouse scroll wheel, and you can pan left and right and up and down. And so that's how the interface works. Over here, you can slide this window over. This is the inspector tab for anything we have in the scene. By default, we have a camera and a light. You can see that there's the camera and the light right there. So anything in the hierarchy is essentially in your scene. It says scene right there. Anything in the game view is what you're seeing through the camera. And all your settings will appear here if you click on something. So the camera has all its settings right here. And that's how the inspector works up there. The project tab has everything that's in your folder system of your projects. So to begin with, we need to start putting stuff in our folder. We're going to need Playmaker to do our coding, so we need to import that. If you are looking to buy a copy of it, you can get Playmaker from hutonggames.com. If you go over to type that in and go to, you need Unity already, but once you're ready you can get Playmaker. So you can click on this, or I guess go to store over here. They do have a 30% discount for students. If you click on this word right here, it takes you to the discount section where it's $45. If you'd like to get Playmaker, it's available right here. The school computers already have it installed, so if you use the school computer, you're okay. But if you're working at home, you would have to purchase your own copy of Playmaker. Alright, so let's jump back into Unity. Assuming you have a copy now, or if you're on the school's computer, you may need to go to Assets, Import Package. Sometimes it's here, but you might have to go to Custom Package. If you download it, I stuck it in C Drive, Programs, Unity, Editor, Standard Packages, Playmaker, and so that goes through a whole Unity program and sticks it in a certain folder, so it makes it much easier to find, because we have all the standard packages, so I stuck it in the Playmaker folder. And so we need to import that, basically. So let me jump back to here. So inside Unity, I'm going to grab this and import. If it's already in the school's computer, then you're fine. You don't have to do this step. But if you're doing it from home, you may need to import. This is importing. Since I'm running 5.3, I'm pulling in Playmaker 1.8, so it should be fine. So I'll press import, which will just grab everything. This may take a minute or so, depending on the speed of your computer. We're going to install Playmaker, and you can close out that dialog box. The next thing is to click install again over here. And then, sure, I made a backup. I didn't really do anything, but okay, I made a backup. And here's where it could take like a minute. I think my computer does it around 20-30 seconds. So that more or less covers how the interface works. So we're going to start creating everything in here. So and then press import again. So everything in the project is going to match what's inside of your folder system, which I stuck on the desktop under demo character project. So assets is everything in your project. So you go inside assets, just bring that back. Inside assets, we have the Playmaker, and then everything else will be creating. Meanwhile, this is still importing. Almost there. There's a lot to import. So this is a visual coding language, so instead of typing all the syntax and everything, what you're essentially going to get is a way to say start and connect all your different nodes. Say if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. We're not going to cover too much of this detail. We're going to do something really simple for this, but you can get pretty advanced with this stuff. Let's jump back to here. Just about done. Cool. All right, and it looks like it finished, so now I can close. Oops. Sure, I don't need any updates. So now I can close that. Playmaker's installed, and you'll notice there's a Playmaker option up here, so we can adjust settings if need be. All right, so now the Playmaker's installed. We need to bring in our character. We can double check to make sure everything works. If you press play right here, and you don't get any errors, then you're good to go. Sometimes you may get errors down on the bottom screen down here, and you just have to correct them. But if it plays, then everything's ready to keep going. So let's jump back to Maya. So I'll grab one of my characters. This looks like it's the walk cycle character. When you're exporting a character, you want to make sure you export everything that has the character. You don't need to click on the joints per se, but you need to get the polygons with it. Don't just grab the rings. If you grab the rings, it'll look like it highlights everything, but it actually doesn't grab the polygons. So if for some reason you still have your character referenced over here and you can't grab the polygons, clicking this won't send the character out. It'll just send the rings out, and that won't help. So we need to make sure everything's unreferenced, that you can grab the polygons. You'll notice that there's keyframes everywhere, so if I were to press play, it should play through the walk cycle, and that's exactly what we need. So you pick the range that you need. I need 1 through, it looks like 23 on this one. So I'll select everything now, so all of it's selected, and then go to File, Export Selection. And then over here, let's go to Desktop. I'll put it inside the character folder. So we're going to export it directly into the Unity file. So if I go to Export into the Assets folder, and you can make it a little more organized if you want and make subfolders and all that, but might as well. We'll call this Models folder. So I'll put this inside the Models and call this the Walk, Character Walk. Okay, and then let's go through the settings real quick. So we need to make sure that on these settings we're exporting our animation. So if you don't see that, just go to File, Type, Specific Options, expand that out to make sure animation is expanded out. We need to check mark that the animation is getting exported with it. And we need to bake the animation. I don't need 48 frames, I'm only using 23, so I'm going to shorten that to 23. So I'm going to export frame 1 to frame 23, and it's going to bake the animation, which means every frame will remember what's happening. If you don't bake it, it doesn't quite carry into the game engine. And then all the rest of it should be fine. For scale, I have it set to automatic in centimeters. You might, depending on if you model it in meters or anything else, it should be okay. You may just have to resize things when it gets into the game engine. Alright, and that should about cover everything we need here. So let's export that. Okay, usually you get these little pop-up windows, just close that. Alright, so we have the walk cycle exported now. Let's go over to, let's check Unity. You'll notice that as I click into Unity, it automatically updated and put a models folder in here with our character. So as you can see, anything you save inside the folder system will automatically update inside Unity. So make sure you don't take anything out of that folder system because you'll lose it inside of Unity. Unity needs to have it inside the assets folder at all times. Alright, let's go back to the other one. This should be the idle animation. If I press play, you can see that he's idling. Repeat the process and make sure it's unreferenced. Grab everything, go File, Export Selection. Everything should already be checked because it was checked last time, but let's shorten this to, I guess this time's running at 24, 23 should be fine also. I'll do 23. And I'll call this one Character Idle. and it's going to go to the assets folder. Wrong one. Desktop, this one, assets, models. Okay, so that's the other one was a test copy. Alright, so character idle, close. Alright, so that finishes up with Maya. So now we exported everything. We don't need to grab the joints, we just need to grab the rings and the polygons. Let's jump back to here. They should update automatically. We now have both of these in here. The next thing we want to do is adjust some settings. By default, the model is set to 1. Depending on how big it is when it appears in here, you may need to adjust that. I think mine needs to be about 100 in order to see it. So type 100 and press apply down here. That's all because it's 0.01 in the import, so you may need to adjust that depending. So the rig is generic, that's fine. And animations, over here we want to name this. This is the walk animation, so I'm going to change take 1 to walking. Press enter. Otherwise you're going to get 2 different take 1s and you won't know which one's which. So we're going to call it walking. We're going to set it to loop and loop the pose. Alright, everything should be set for that. You can see here that it'll play through your animation that you picked from. Let's apply those settings and repeat that for idle. So click on idle. This guy should be called, we'll just call it idle. We're going to loop it and loop pose, apply, and we'll go to the model and set him to 100 also. If you don't press apply for some reason, you click off, it'll ask you need to apply. Okay, cool. Alright, so now we have both of these. So the settings should be about set the way we need them now. Now we're going to put or at least one of these characters in our scene. We can either take this character and drag him into the scene, or we can drag him into the hierarchy tab. In either case, it'll both appear in the scene. So if I dropped him here, you can see he popped in the scene. If I zoom out, you can see he's sitting here. I can rotate around and look at him from any angle. We're also going to want to put a ground plane in there. So under game object, 3D object, plane, I can drop a plane in here. I want to make the plane a bit bigger so he has more room to walk on. Your move, rotate, and scale, just like in Maya, is also the WER. I can expand this out so he has a walking plane now. I can click on the character, and I kind of want to put him in the center, but he doesn't have to be in the center. You can put him anywhere in the world, but he at least needs to be above the ground so that he's not going to fall through on start. If he's floating, he'll fall down and land on the ground, but as long as he's pretty close, as long as he's not inside the ground, then he'll just keep falling when the game starts. Alright, if you wanted him to be, expand those out. If you wanted him to be centered, you could put 0, 0. I'll leave the Y because the Y will push him to the ground. Alright, so now he's in the middle of the world. This one might not be in the middle either, but I could zero this out. That's not super important. It looks like the character needs to go a little bit higher now. Okay, so now he's in the middle of the world. The next thing we want to do is to put on, I guess, a name for the character. So if I click on this, right now it's called character idle. I'm just going to call him basic character. You don't have to name him, but by naming him you won't get confused of you're using an animation. He's just called the basic character. Cool. And by default he has an animator parameter, or an animator component on him already, but he doesn't have a controller. So we need to put a controller so that he can be controlled and told when his animations need to occur. So if I go back over to the Create tab, click on Create, and go to Animator Controller, you can call it whatever you want. I guess I'll call it Character Animator Controller. Okay, now to put this on the character, you just grab your character. You can grab him here, or you can grab the one in the scene. Click and drag this onto that open area, and it pops right in here. So now the character has an animation controller on him to tell him what's going to occur. The next thing you want to do is pull up the Animator Controller tab, which is this one right here. If you don't have this tab for whatever reason, if it's like, let's close this out. So if you don't have an Animator tab, you just go over to Window and look for Animator. And you pull it up, and it pops up right here. You could separate these out and kind of put one tab over to the side of the screen, and so now you can see what's in the scene, and you can still see what's inside here. To move this around, you just use the middle mouse, push it down, and you can kind of pan just like you're panning in the viewport. By default, it's going to go to the entry state. We need to tell it to give it 2 more states for animation. So let's right-click, go to Create State, and we're going to create an empty. You can move this around however you want. Doesn't really matter. On this new state, if you click on it, you'll see all your inspector information for anything that we're going to modify is in here. I'm going to call this one idle, and I'm going to take the motion, which is set to none, click on this little bullet point, and say go to idle. Unfortunately, I guess I didn't name it, so it's still under take 1. So double click on that, and it should open it up here. If I wanted to go and rename that, I just go back to the idle, go to the animation settings where it still says take 1, and call that idle. Press enter. If you don't press enter, it doesn't actually save it, I don't think. Press idle, and then press apply. So now it saves it. So now when I go back to the animator, click on this, you'll see it automatically adjusts the name because it's been renamed down there. Alright, so we have the idle. We're also going to need a walking. So right click again, create empty, and then I'll call this one, I guess, walking. Press enter to confirm the name, go to the bullet point, and grab the walking animation. Alright, so now we have both of these. If I right click now and go to make transition, I can move this and click on the walking, and it will take the idle animation to the walking. I can right click, make transition, and go back to idle. So now he'll go idle to walk, and back and forth all the time. The reason he's orange is because this is the default state. So as soon as the game starts, he'll be in the idle position. If this is orange, as soon as the game starts, he'll be walking. So you probably want the idle as soon as the game starts. If I press play at this point, you should see the character is alternating between the two. He's going between walking and idling, so as soon as one finishes, it goes to here and then back to here, and they switch back and forth. And we need to code that now to tell it when he moves, which one do you play. Before we do that coding, we need to actually code it so we can physically move. Alright, so in order to code the, we need to add one more thing. Let's go and add a parameter. So you have layers here and you have parameters here, also inside the animator tab. So I click on parameters and click this plus sign. We need a float variable, which means has decimal point numbers. And then we're going to call this speed. Whatever you name it here has to be exactly spelled the same way when we get to the code. So if you use uppercase, lowercase, whatever letters you use has to be exactly spelled the same way. That's how code works. So press enter. So I have speed, and I used all lowercase in this case. Alright, so now let's go put the code on the character. Let's click on the character here. Let's go to add component. And you should see, if you've already imported your Playmaker, you should see a Playmaker option here. Click on Playmaker, go to Playmaker FSM. GUI is for your interface of what's on the screen, so finite state machine, FSM is what we're going to use. Click on this, and then you don't need to worry about the settings here. Just go to the edit mode right here. This will pull up our visual editing code. We're going to put all of our actions in here, but we're going to need 2 variables first. So if we click on the Variables tab, we can see we have no variables. I'm going to go and add under where it says new variable down here. I'm going to call this one speed. The spelling doesn't necessarily matter for this case because it's not the same variable, even though it's calling it the same. So it's a float variable. I'm going to add that. And if you want to click off of it, you can click off here in the empty area, and you'll see it down here. It changes to add a new one. This one I'm going to call movement. And this one is going to be a vector 3, which will record his directional motions. And then we'll click on add. And so now I have 2. I have a speed float and a movement vector 3. Let's go back to the state. This is state 1. We're already clicked on it. If you click off it, you're not going to see this, but click back on there and you're on the state. We need to add some actions now. If I click on the action browser, it'll pull up this window. And I want to put these actions into here. I've already used the recent ones, but if I were to close it out, you can hunt down any action you're looking for by clicking on these things, or you can search it up here. I'm going to look for a get axis vector. That one's under input and under recent because I used it recently. But get axis vector. You can double click it or drag it right into the actions. By default we have horizontal and vertical and multiplier 5. Your multiplier is kind of your speed of how fast he's moving, so I'm going to set him to 5 so he moves a little quicker. But you can come back and change that number, it's just how fast he's moving forward. Relative to, and if you click on the bullet point, we're going to go into the scene, not the assets. Assets is in the project, we don't have a camera in the project, so we're going to go to the scene, and everything that's currently sitting in our scene is listed here. And since we named everything, we can see all the bones and joints and everything. But I want the main camera. So double click on that, and so now we're going to move relative to wherever the camera is facing. And we'll get back to the camera later. We're going to store the vector as the movement, since we did a vector 3. We're going to store the magnitude as the speed. And that sets up the first section. So now we're going to put the next action on here. This was going to be called controller simple move. That's under character. Grab this and drag this in here. By default, there's a error message. It says you need an extra component. So all you do is just click this red area, and it'll add that extra component in there for you. So we want to take the movement vector, or the move vector, and set that to what we're storing right here. So when we press the keyboard to move them, we're storing it, and now we're going to recall it so that it knows that I've stored whatever number this was when you moved into movement, and now it's going to put that into the controller. So we're going to go to the next option then, and smooth look at direction. That's under transform. Drag this one in here. This is going to be the target direction is the movement. So whatever direction he's moving towards, he's going to turn and look at that direction. We're going to go type in, I guess, the speed of how fast he's turning. You probably want that to be a little bit lower. If it's a high number, he's going to spin in circles really fast. So the lower the number, the slower he's going to turn to look at that direction. You may not want it too slow, because then it'll take very long for him to actually turn and look at what he's moving towards. So 2 seems to be a decent number for that, but it could vary depending on the size of your character. Alright, the last thing we need to add on is the set animator float. It's under the animator tab, so put that in there, and that's the last one we're going to add. It looks like it didn't quite pop it in the right order. It shouldn't matter, but if you wanted to reorder it, you can drag it underneath there, and so now it's in this order. The order does matter in code, but for the character we're working on, it may not matter as much. Alright, the parameter is the one we set right here. So this, the way you spelled it, is the way it gets spelled here. So speed, it's different than the speed up here, but we want this speed to become this speed. So I'm going to change the 0. Since it's going to change all the time, we need to tell it, I don't want a number, I want to pick the variable of speed. So whenever the speed changes, it'll change the animator's parameter right here. And we want to do this every frame. Every frame means every 30th of a second it's going to change that number. If you don't have this checked, it'll change it once and never again. So it won't actually show the animation, so we need every frame. Alright, and that finishes up the code aspect. So we shouldn't have to put any more on there. So easy enough. Actually, let's move this into this tab down here, just so I can adjust it if need be later. And I'll put this down there also so I can come back to those. Alright, so now that we have this set, if I were to press play, he should, looks like he popped up. So the reason he's popping up is because we have a collision box now. The collision is this little green area right here. This is what's colliding between objects. The ground already has a collision, but his collision is too low. So let's unplay the game, click on him. You see the green box is here. If we pull this up, it pulls him up. This has to be above the ground. It's popping him because of that reason, so Control Z. We need to move the green box. The green box is this animator controller, or the character controller sitting on the character. So you don't move it by grabbing it, you have to move it through the settings here, since we only want to move this and not the character. Moving the character will change these numbers, so don't mess with those numbers. We need to mess with these. So we'll set the center. If you grab the Y and click and drag, it'll slide this up and down. So I want to center this somewhere in the middle of him. I'm going to change the radius and click and drag on the word radius. It expands it out. And then click on the height, click and drag, expand that out. So it looks like it about covers him. Looks like it's still going to the ground, so let's pull that up higher. Alright, Looks like it's higher than it needs to be because it's more than his head height. I can keep playing with the numbers if I want to. I'll just try 3 real quick. Alright. Looks like it's not quite. Let's try 6 right here. So smaller. That's good enough for now. Alright, so you can see he has collision on here, so if I press play at this point, this collision box will hit the ground and he's not going to fall through it. Anything that hits this green will count as a hit against him. So now whatever I'm looking at, let's go to the move. If I click on the game view to make sure this is the active viewport, if I press forward, he should move forward. If I turn left or right, he'll move whichever direction we're looking at. But if you notice, he's still alternating between walk and idle. He doesn't know when to switch between the two. Alright. So let's go unplay that, and we just need to go into the transitions right here in the animator, telling it when it needs to switch between idle and walking. Let's click on this transition right here. So between idle to walking, it needs to be set to under the conditions area. Click on the plus. We're adding a condition, the speed, which is the parameter right here, speed. When speed is greater than 0.1, so it's just more than 0, he's starting to move, then he's allowed to move to the walking state. To go from walking back to idle, we click on this and we set a new condition. We'll add that and say when the speed is less than 0.1, which means he's practically stopped at that point, that means go back to idle, he's probably not moving. So now we're going to have the option of him playing. So if I press forward at this point, he should walk forward. If I release, he'll go back to idle. You may notice that there's a lag between it, like I've already let go for a second, but he's still walking. That's because of the exit time right here. So if you make any changes outside of play mode when you unplay it, sometimes those changes won't occur. So make sure you make your changes outside of play mode. Let's say, for example, that one did stay, but if I'm in play mode, I grab the character, I move him, and then I unplay the game, it reverts back. Any changes you make while in play mode don't always stick. Sometimes they do in these settings, but a lot of times they don't. So just be careful, don't animate or don't move anything while in play mode. Alright, so let's click back on the main character. Actually, click back on the transition state. We want to make sure there's no exit time on that one. Click back on the other transition, make sure there's no exit time again. And now if I press play, it should respond instantly. So when I press forward, he'll walk. When I let go, he instantly goes back to idle. Alright, and so now he can walk wherever you want him to go. One of the last things to do is to adjust the camera. So if you look around, you'll see the camera is sitting right here. By default, the camera is looking right at him. If I pull the camera up, you can see that it's changing the camera view. I can't rotate, scale, position, anything in this view. This is just simply what the game sees. So I have to move the camera manually. Let's go to the rotate command and rotate it down. So whatever I see in the camera is what I'm going to get in the final result of the game. So that should be, oops, wrong direction. Alright, so let's call that good enough. You can adjust it however you want. So since we've already set the character to move based on the camera view, if I were to press play at this point, and I press forward, since forward is away from the camera, he'll walk forward. If I press backwards, he'll flip around and walk towards the camera. So however you want to work it, he'll move all around the world, as in like a zoomed out view, so he can walk around your game. If you wanted a camera to follow the character over the shoulder, let's stop the game. Let's take this camera, wherever it is, main camera, and you can close out all these things, just minimize them. We need to take the main camera and parent it to the basic character. To parent in Unity, you simply click, drag, and put it on top of your basic character, and it moves the camera inside of your character. So now when I press play, whenever the character moves, the camera will also move. So if I turn, you can see the camera turns. So however I position the camera will move him. So if you wanted to go with a zoomed out view and he moves but the camera doesn't, that's fine. If you wanted to take the camera and, oops, pause that, move the camera super in close, and then now you have an over-the-shoulder view. You could play your game like this also. So however you want to do that, everything should be set at this point. If you were to walk off the edge, he does have gravity, so he'll fall off. If you wanted to build some kind of level where he can move around and fall around on things, that's up to you. But as long as you have a character that's walking, then that's all you would need to worry about. The last thing we need to do is export this, since we don't want to have to open Unity every time to play the game. Let's go to File. We need to save the game first. So Save As, and make sure you save it inside your assets. Rule of thumb, I guess, everything goes inside assets. So you created a folder when you started Unity, everything has to get saved inside assets. So let's call this, since I already have a models folder, keep it organized, I'll put a scenes folder. It's still inside of the assets folder, but it keeps the things more organized. I'll call this basic scene. Save. Now that I have the scene named, I can go to File, Build Settings, and you have to add your scene to the build settings. So add open scenes, which is the current scene that we're in. So the basic scene has now been added to your build. Everything else should be fine. We're just going to do a PC executable. We'll click Build. It's going to ask, where do you want to save this? You don't have to put the build inside the assets folder because Unity doesn't need to see it. You can hand your friends the build, so that's fine. It doesn't have to go inside that. I'm going to call this final, what's it called, basic character. Demo. Alright, so it's going to save an exe. I press save. It should see a green bar. If the green bar finishes, then it worked. If the green bar cuts out at some point, then something messed up. There's some errors down there that need to be fixed before the build will work. It looks like it's lagging, but it's almost finished. So while it's finishing, let's go back to here. So I saved it. We now have a basic character demo underscore data. The data folder contains all the data. The exe contains the character, or the file. So you need at all times to have the data and the exe. So you'll submit the data and the exe for your project homework. If you click on just the exe, you can hand these to all your friends. Let's go to, I use like windowed because it's easier to close it out. If I press play at this point, it opens a window with the game. And so everything I do, we can play the character. So however you last left the scene when you pressed build, you have the character moving. And that about covers how to put your character, or a basic character, inside the Unity game engine.